All right. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Civics. My name is Tom Christie. Thanks for tuning in or watching this on tape. We talk about civics. What makes society, what makes, in my eyes, a city. So we're going to focus on one city, Niagara Falls, New York, United States. And how did it get to where it is? Why is it the way it is, good or bad? And how do you work in society? So every week we've had one of these topics. The last 2 weeks we've talked oddly about property value and properties and grass not being cut and simple things like just keeping things clean. That kind of morphed into land use in everybody's eyes of what is land in a city? That's certainly a prime thing. So that led us to questions of, in Niagara Falls, there seems to be an inordinate amount of at least vacant properties, and we can tell because the grass is not cut. So it all became obvious. So with that, there's also something going on out there that I'm a very slow catch up on is the social media world. And what rocked my foundations were when in the city of Buffalo, India Walton beat a 16-term incumbent with what seemed like unlimited wealth and resources at his disposal, and did it without the Buffalo News, the channels 2, 4, or 7, or any radio station ever mentioning her name. Where did that come from? How did somebody take just passion and ideas and turn it into, I'm the mayor now? That was, I don't know, that rocked my world. So this social media thing that probably started 20 years ago is real. To that effect, I have slowly started to get on social media and follow people on Twitter. And I myself have now discovered there's a whole bunch of people out there that know stuff that I don't find in my normal course of 247 in the Buffalo News. And in fact, now I'm a complete convert. There's lots of people out there who know lots of stuff and they're readily available to talk. So along those lines, I found a guy that I follow and read everything he writes called Jason Knight. Jason's on the screen over there. We'll get to him in a minute. But everything he was writing, I was having an epiphany. I'm like, that's right. Well, that's right. I'm not reading that anywhere else. So you reach out to these people and they're real human beings and they really live in the city that you live in. So that's how we found Jason Knight. Now, in fact, he's an author, co-author of a book. We'll put that on screen. And I asked him about land use in Niagara Falls, and within about an hour, he sent me 2 detailed maps. Here's Jason's book that he co-authored. You can find it. I found it on Amazon, so you can go find it there and order it if you'd like. But this is a pretty accomplished person who I thought was just tweeting some comments about society. So anyway, with that long-winded introduction, I hope we can learn a lot from Jason Knight here this morning. Jason, thanks for joining us from your home.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me you're actually a PhD geographer. Is that true? And what is that?
Yeah, I am a geography PhD. I think most commonly people associate geography with physical geography, right? So it's land masses and rivers and lakes and streams and mountains and such. But there's really 2 fields in the geographic discipline, and the second is human geography. Which essentially studies the patterns of people, right? Patterns of people on the earth, how ideas transfer from one place to another. One of the subsets of human geography is urban geography, which is where my research focuses on. It really studies the various processes that make up cities, right? So within that subdiscipline, there's literally any number of focus areas that people can spend their twiddle away their time at. And I've always been interested in land and housing, and the policies that shape and reshape land and housing, and the things that impact those 2 systems that are maybe somewhat outside the land and housing markets that maybe don't have or people might not have real much influence on it, but they're impacted by decisions that are made outside of those two disciplinary areas. So yeah, I mean, I'm a spatial thinker, spatial geographer.
Yeah. Well, so it's a trite, silly statement to say land is where a city is, but a city is the whole society. There's land and land usage, and you mentioned housing. So obviously, we know that that's a component. It's a fairly serious component, land use.
Yeah, I mean, the land use dictates how a city essentially functions, right? Local governments dictate how land is used in their communities. They legally have the right to set the conditions by which land is used. And so the way that they do that results in the outcomes that we see on the ground, the experiences in our day-to-day lives, the opportunities that we have, the amenities that we have, or maybe sometimes the disamenities we have or lack of opportunities we have. So land is the fundamental building block of the city.
And you say quite often something I like to say too, that it's not broken, it was built this way. So the land use of, again, I want to focus on one place so that we can focus on all of our civics discussions on one place so we don't get distracted. So Niagara Falls. So Niagara Falls is exactly as it is by design, is what you'd be kind of telling me?
Well, I mean, its current state is, part design, part, ordinance, public policy, those types of issues, but also it's in many ways a victim to economic circumstances and economic changes. Cities aren't located on the planet randomly. They don't just pop up for no reason whatsoever in some sort of random location. They're located in a position based on economic circumstances. So, the city of Buffalo owes us a distance essentially to being on a waterway, right? All early cities were built essentially on waterways. It provided the ability to move people around and about. It provided economic opportunity. It provided, in many cases, fresh water for drinking, but also irrigation, so crops could be produced. So, the earliest cities, if you go way, way back, were all located on bodies of water. All the industrial cities in the American Northeast, what we sort of refer to as the Rust Belt, are cities that were built on waterways because that was a key transportation methodology. Niagara Falls is no different. Niagara Falls really owes its existence to geography as well, the ability to produce power. And then the ability to produce power creates the ability to attract essentially industries that rely on large amounts of power to produce some product, right? So cities are geographically located where they are for a number of reasons, what we sort of refer to as preconditions, right? And so from that point forward, when we look at old cities like Buffalo and Niagara Falls or Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, those old industrial cities that were heavily leveraged in manufacturing and building and making things, that economy went away. And when that economy went away, those jobs went away. And cities were in some ways, you could say, victims to that sort of transfer of economic opportunity. Excuse me. And then at that point, cities are left to try to battle this ever-changing economic landscape. Fewer and fewer jobs that impact the households that live in their communities. So you get the households in their communities that are no longer employed, and then that creates sort of fiscal stress on households and governments. And then you get this sort of long process of decline and disinvestment, which it turns out for a lot of places is really, really hard to pull yourself out of, right? Buffalo is included in that. Niagara Falls is included, Cleveland, Detroit. And so you get this long run circumstance where cities try to change their way that they plan for and develop their land, but ultimately sometimes the process has been so catastrophic, it's really hard to dig out of it.
Well, Niagara Falls seems different to me in that it wasn't on a waterway per se for shipping and irrigation. It had the falls always there, like power, hydropower was it, and it is still it, and it will always be it for the next 5,000 years. So it didn't face the Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo model. It's its own thing. And I've been told by several elected officials, we're a poor city, get over it. Do you think Niagara Falls should be better than it is? Is it just what it is? Is it a poor city, get over it? It's the hydropower thing and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, any politician who tells you to accept your current status as a city, whatever that status is, ignores the reality of change and evolution. But also, I think, has created a cover or shield to throw their hands up and say there's nothing we can do. And I don't buy into the there's nothing we can do solution. You have to change the status quo, right? And so if you don't change the status quo, the system will function as it's currently functioning, right? It will continue to produce the outputs that it produces. Mm-hmm. And just arguing that we should just be who we are is, I don't know, to me, that's a quitter's mentality.
So do you think it could be more though? Or like sure. I posit that it's a unique place on the planet and it should be as relevant as Singapore, not just a little bit nicer Batavia. I mean, I think it's got huge potential. Is that wrong?
And it certainly does, and it certainly should be more than it is. And then that begs the question, how, right? And I think what we struggle with in New York, upstate New York, in our old cities is really visionary leadership, right? I mean, it ultimately comes down to the vision of the person who's the CEO of the local government, right? Local governments are businesses. No business CEO in the private sector would throw their hands up and say, well, we're just a failing company, we're just going to fail, right? But we accept that for some odd reason from local government, right? Which is to say we shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't accept that this is our lot in life, and we should just go, okay, we're just going to manage this condition. And then that, I don't think, is the right way forward.
Well, you did a couple of maps for us, and if Mike could put up the Niagara Falls version, the downtown tourist area map, where land use seems to be suboptimal is the way I'll say it. But you know, we've got anything that's colored here is basically not in the hands of anybody who can do anything with it, right?
It's a little bit of both, right? So you have local government as a significant, local and state government as a significantly large landholder and landowner in and around downtown. So the scale of this map is a little bit wonky in that it looks like you have this beige color that hogs a lot of space on the map, and that's bad, right? That's public parkland. That's the backbone of Niagara Falls, right? If you're going to build it back, that's the backbone. So in some ways, that's lying with maps maybe a little bit, but the rest of it is either local government in some way, shape, or form, and then that large blue chunk is the Seneca Nation. The challenge you have is most of that land is not returning tax revenue, so there's no money to put. Mostly downtowns function as high density, high economic activity, high tax return and locations for local government. They derive a lot of value from that. You're not driving a lot of tax value from that in Niagara Falls. So that limits your ability to draw in tax revenue to address issues around the rest of the city. Because basically almost everything in that downtown area is tax exempt or in some form of pilot project that doesn't pay any tax. It pays a very small share of the taxes it should actually pay.
But let me just clarify one thing though. The purple and the tan there on the fall that goes along the water, and you correctly pointed out, you know, it's government property, but it is not repairing one thing to the city. I'm only worried about the city because I don't control the state. It is giving zero to the city. So if you're talking about building the city, that's not part of the city. That's foreign territory, so to speak. It belongs to someone else. So that is relevant in this because it pays not one, penny back to the city. But getting back to the green and blue and a little bit of the red, the blue is where the casino is. So we gave that land away to the Senecas 20 years ago. And then between the blue and the brink of the falls there is probably the tourist area where you go if you're staying at a hotel. It's not only just that way, it's vacant land. Those are all vacant storefronts for the most part. What does it need to be? Is that by design? Why are they all vacant?
I don't know that it's necessarily by design. No one designs vacancy. It comes baked into the system when it does what it does, right? So you have a lot of parking down there, right? So surface parking lots, and you have a lot of publicly owned property. So the light yellowish color is City of Niagara Falls property, so clearly not paying tax revenue, right? The argument they would make probably is that it's a accessory use to properties or businesses that pay taxes. So people can park down on the city-owned property and then they can walk to things that pay taxes and produce revenue for the local government. But there's a number of researchers out there. A guy named Joe Minicozzi does a lot of really good work on land value and taxation and density, and makes the argument that designing any core downtown area with lots of parking basically strips the potential for revenue generation out of your city because there's no tax revenue coming out of parking, right? At a per square foot tax revenue generation factor, putting a building on that makes more sense, right? So a 10-story building where a parking lot exists is going to return way more taxes for local government than a surface parking lot that it owns and maybe does or does not collect taxes on. So it's also the sort of opportunity cost of lost potential revenue when you don't turn those types of uses into something that is more productive. It contributes to the vitality and vibrancy of downtown.
Did you, maybe it's out of your expert zone, but did you think that huge blue area was worth giving away for what it gave away 20 years in hindsight?
I mean, I don't know the particular of the sort of agreement between the state and the city and Seneca Nation in terms of what that returns annually. But my guess would be it returns significantly less than it would otherwise if it was redeveloped in a more dense manner through the private sector. And I'm not a champion of, sort of turning everything over to the private sector because somehow they're better and more efficient and more effective, because that always comes with a large chunk of socialized debt as well. It's a substantial portion of your downtown, and it is lost to something that is exploitative to local households, which is it basically extracts revenue from local households through gambling. It takes up 56 acres of prime land. It doesn't return probably what it should return, and it captures all of that foot traffic internally, right? The intention of a casino is to keep you inside. It's not for you to go and spend an hour wasting your money and then suddenly go, okay, we're going to go walk around downtown and spend our money at bars and restaurants. They make sure that you spend your money at bars and restaurants internally. So all of that revenue is captured. And so it really doesn't support, the casino does not support adjacent uses. It's not even by design in any way, shape, or form. So it's really about capturing a captive audience and keeping them there. So the benefit in and around downtown is highly questionable and dubious.
Now, Jason, we got somebody has a question, but let me just say, 20 years ago, I used to do this too. I used to talk to people on TV, and I was told by every economic development person in Niagara County and in the city of Niagara Falls that it would generate and save the neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, stop talking to economic development professionals. That's their job.
Good short answer. Thank you. Hey, can we get John Rustino on a question here? John's got a question. John? Talking permitted. Hey, John, your microphone is muted. John, we can't hear you. Well, when he unmutes his microphone, we'll hear him. But I did want to, oh, John, you're unmuted. Go ahead. John?
I think he dropped off.
He dropped off. Okay. But I don't want to talk to economic development people that tell me that, but damn it, that's who builds these communities. Like, they didn't just talk to me. They sold that bill of goods to everyone, and here we have it 20 years later. I mean, who are we supposed to talk to?
I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, we've created this entire industry in New York State, and it's basically, without delving deep into the sort of where this comes from politically, the post-Reagan era, the sort of trickle-down era, created this monster, right? That this idea that all we have to do is support businesses and development and growth, right? So this massive pro-growth model that we deploy in every city, town, and village in New York State and across this country is predicated on this idea that type of sort of enterprise, right? That we will build things, we will create jobs, and that will help local governments is basically an untouchable pillar of governance in this country. And the reality becomes, right, that when we dig a little bit deeper and we look at the actual impacts and the actual benefits from this type of sort of neoliberal public policy, it doesn't trickle out. It doesn't trickle down. It basically puts a lot of money in the pockets of existing developers who are landholders. We pay them to invest in their own property. So we create a lot of wealth that actually gets pushed up, right? So this is what I always refer to as, privatized profit, socialized debt, right? So we socialize and we invest in this thing as taxpayers, but every single taxpayer does not benefit from that, right? So we create the system whereby we're supposed to support local businesses and support developers to do the things they do because it's going to benefit us. But when we look at it, by and large, it doesn't benefit everybody. City of Buffalo is a classic example, right? This whole resurgence narrative and this whole resurgence conversation is just so far off base. It's ridiculous, which is why India was able to basically get people interested in a conversation about how we move a city forward in an equitable and just manner, rather than in a manner that is the same pro-growth, developer-driven gentrification model. And if we don't figure out a way to walk away from thinking that corporations are going to save us, we're going to continue to have this conversation.
So it seems like a classic economic argument to have the government in charge or the community in charge or capitalism or free society or whatever. But, the government owns all that property down there and they're giving it away under a preferred developer model. What is a preferred developer model? Why do we have that word preferred developer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super up to speed on that exact idea. Essentially, my understanding is, and I could be a little bit off base. The preferred developer model, I think, gets around a lot of the sort of RFP and auction processes in New York State, whereby city land is supposed to, under state law, be sold at auction or by RFP, by bid, to the highest bidder, right? But there's a million ways around that statutory requirement at the state level. One of them is you can transfer that property to a local development corporation under state law. Local development corporations have powers that local governments don't have, and they can sell it in any way they want. Essentially, preferred development is you come to an agreement on a piece of property of interest for a developer, and you work collectively to determine what that development ultimately becomes, which is a little bit different than, so in theory, the government has, or the IDA or local development corporation has some more say and more control in it because they ultimately own the property, right? So it's a little bit different than the traditional as of right process where a developer owns a piece of property, understands fully what the zoning code permits, and shows up with a site plan and has what we refer to as sort of as of right rights to develop it based on the ordinance, right? And it doesn't require anything other than a review, administrative review and approval by local government. So the preferred developer really is a way to, in theory, keep a little bit of control on what gets developed. But ultimately, the outcomes are the same outcomes we always get, regardless of preferred development status or not.
Well, that's a very textbook description of it. But didn't Simonelli have a problem with this? I mean, didn't we run into problems where it didn't work quite as purely as you're describing? Doesn't it have a lot of flaws in it for fraud?
Yeah, it just seems like the preferred developer status is a really good way for a developer to kind of milk government for more than might otherwise be given. And that is when you've basically said, I'm the only developer for this parcel of land that you own, so I'm going to get everything I want and you're going to give it to me. There's I guess, for someone who's done work for a local development corporation here in the city of Tonawanda, we've tried to start, I can see it from both sides, but I just feel like there's no real easy way to go about it. When the public owns land, right? I just feel like the process of land disposition and land sales, and then the ultimate development end game should be democratic and transparent. And largely, it's just not.
When the public doesn't own the land anymore, it's been transferred to an arm of state government and an agency that controls it completely, and the public doesn't control it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, right? So, Niagara Falls is a government that controls a large number of properties in the city of Niagara Falls. Niagara County IDA is a non-government organization, and that's a different animal by and large.
So the Rainbow Mall is there, right? It's just been there for 20 years vacant. It's just been it's been a problem forever. Why? The city doesn't control that, yet it's there. We just learned, the city doesn't control it. This Economic Development Corporation controls it. So nothing can be done. So you can become elected mayor. You have no control over that big parcel of land. You may have run on the policy that you want to fix downtown. You don't control much of it at all. I mean, so getting back to building a city and who's in control and society and land use, there isn't any. Like you and I can't take $100 and open a coffee shop on Old Falls Boulevard to service all those tourists walking around going, where can I get something to eat, right? So we can't. It's vacant. It's locked up. Every storefront is empty. Why don't we as entrepreneurs open up? Well, we can't. None of those properties are available. Not now, for the last 30, 40 years. I mean, we're not just doing this saying, oh, it's a little bit bad today. And maybe it'll be bad, maybe it'll be better tomorrow. But going on 40 years of living here, I'm not banking on it anymore.
Yeah, so I still think that governments are not victims here, right? Ultimately, we created state law that allowed for the creation of public authorities in New York State, which are rudderless, inefficient, wasteful, non-transparent entities that can rack up as much debt as they want and pass that debt on to taxpayers, and we have no control over it. But at the same time, I would argue if you ran for public office and you didn't know the laws and rules around land use and zoning in your community and who owns what, that's your fault. And second to that, you can essentially just go in and use eminent domain. The Supreme Court basically turned eminent domain away from its initial intentions, which was to benefit the public good. So in Kelo versus New London, they essentially said eminent domain is power of local government for anything that seeks to improve the government's economic condition, right? So in theory, what they said was the government now has the right to take property from one landowner and transfer it to another landowner. So the government can use essentially eminent domain to be a pass-through to take property, right, from one private entity and give it to another private entity for economic development purposes. So economic development is now within the quote unquote police power of local government, right? So in theory, the city could take any property in the town that's not state owned, as far as I understand. I don't think they could take state owned or other government owned property, but they could take any property that anyone owns and get away with it.
So why do you think, this is somewhat outside your bailiwick here, but why do you think they don't do that in Niagara Falls? Amherst had one outside developer from Manhattan who wasn't developing one parcel, and they took it. And the guy screamed and he threatened them, but they took it. Niagara Falls has 140 acres under the same model. They've got probably one of the most valuable pieces of property. I mean, just valuable in the sense of it's the next thing that should be developed in the Turtle. Millions of people walk by the Turtle and it's vacant. It's owned by a private developer. Why doesn't the city do something with that?
Because Brian Culpa has two things that most politicians in Western New York don't have: will and guts. That's it. Comes down to will and guts. Are you willing to do everything within your power as the CEO of local government to change the outcomes in your community, or are you not? And that's it. You have tools and powers. And again, you've said it a bunch of times. Governments love to throw their hands up and play victims, but they're not victims. They act like victims, but they're not victims. There's a lot of ways out of a lot of these challenges with vacant and abandoned land. It just comes down to will, and I just don't see a lot of will.
So there's
not Niagara Falls. There's no will.
Right. So there's no way out if those 5 council people and mayor do not do something. They're at the point. I'm not accusing blame. I'm just saying they're the ones that can do something. No one else.
Yeah, they had powers granted to them at the state constitutional level. And the state, general municipal law and state city law that gives them powers to do things that they can do. Choosing not to is a choice.
Wow. Thank you. Hey, do you believe, I didn't think I get an answer to this, that Niagara Falls can be better than it is? I mean, like way better, like one of the most important cities in New York State or the country.
Yeah. I mean, can it be better? Sure. I mean, I don't doubt that at all. I've always said it should and could be better, but I'm a lifelong Western New Yorker and I've just watched it flounder, right? So, and again, there's issues that are troublesome, right? I mean, you've got a massive industrial complex along Buffalo Avenue, and it's hard to redevelop in and around that kind of stuff, right? So that limits potential redevelopment. But at the same time, like I've said it to some of my friends that are in my sort of disciplinary area, so in planning, architecture, landscape architecture, I think Main Street in Niagara Falls is, and I've said the same actually about Oliver Street in North Tonawanda, like it has the bones to be way better than it is. It has the density, the walkability, the commercial corridor that people clamor for. And so it's a building block. You can't solve a city's problem in one massive chop at the tree, right? It takes a lot of chops at it. And so you have to make strategic, small changes to build yourself up to it. Everybody's looking for a silver bullet, right? And that's the pro-growth mentality we have in this country, which is we sell silver bullets. Well, Tesla's going to save us, right? The stadium's going to save us, right? All of these silver bullets that get way overstated by politicians who then go out and cut ribbons and stand there like they did something. That idea is baked into the brains of politicians. Like we have to do huge things. And the reality is huge things aren't possible. They either cost too much money, take too much time. People don't have the technical or fiscal capacity, internal and local government to do it. what you need is small shots, chip away at it in small pieces, right? I said to somebody the other day, it wasn't that somebody could walk up and, create a sculpture by just tapping a piece of marble and it all falls away and you have the sculpture, right? It takes a lot of blows with a hammer and chisel to get to the final product. And so that's the way we should think about changing cities, which is, we need a massive toolbox with a lot of tools in it, and we deploy them individually and try to see if we can come up with things. But it's putting all our money, like in the city of Buffalo, they're wasting their money on filling a budget hole. That wasn't what the money coming out of the federal government was intended to do, which was, fix the malfeasance of Byron Brown's era. The money was supposed to go into helping the community. And we don't hold government to those types of decisions, and we don't want them to be progressive for some reason. It's really mind-boggling. We keep voting the same people in office, which really is bothersome.
So that's good for any city, and Oliver Street and such. But we've got Niagara Falls here. It's an international brand. I've traveled all around the world. People don't know what Buffalo is or Oliver Street, and you say Niagara Falls. Well, if you tell them I'm from Buffalo, they don't know. You say Niagara Falls, they light up. They know the word. They don't even speak English, and they know the word. So if you're going to build a city to build all of Western New York around, I'm kind of positing that that's a good place to start. You've got more assets than just fresh water. You've got the name. You've got the other side in 1982 was about where we are now. And now they get 27 million people coming there. So I don't want to be like the other side. I'm just saying they did something with this thing called tourism. So I'm saying if we were to have any city in the world to build from scratch, build back better, whatever, it seems like Niagara Falls is a good start, and we happen to live here. So
yeah, I mean, it's an option. I mean, it's definitely a place that has assets that could be catalytic, right? I mean, you have a potential, you have a global tourism industry there. With the falls, but at the same time, you have to remember, for 4 or 5 months a year, that's not the draw, right? That's where the casinos come into play, right? So no one's showing up in January in mass to come and check out the falls, right? So you have to balance the way you think about building back better, as you say, in different industries. It can't just be tourism, right? It has to be tourism and other stuff, and that's where the challenge lies. And the other issue for cities like Niagara Falls is downtowns are great, and you can build them back in some way, shape, or form. But neighborhoods are another challenge altogether. And so you can do what Buffalo's done, which is you throw a ton of money in areas that you've spatially identified as worthy of investment. And then you can redline the rest, right? Which is we're not putting money in these places. Well, that's how you get to what you have in Buffalo and you have in Niagara Falls, which is a lot of focus on a downtown area, but a complete ignorance of the rest. And so it can't be all economic development because you have a host of households in your community, in neighborhoods in your community that the market has basically said, we're not interested in that. And you can't build a city back just on downtown. A city isn't just an economic engine.
So all of us are smarter than any of us. I can't build anything. But what I'm asking, I guess, is that if you had all those smart people and gave them this opportunity, it's almost a literally unique opportunity in the nation to build back better with all the assets they have. Bring in all the people you want to do those right things with those chisels in their toolbox. But we got the rock right here, literally, to start chiseling better than Oliver Street, better than Buffalo, better than Cleveland or Detroit, is what I'm saying. It's a completely perfect block of marble to start working on.
Sure.
Anyway, John's back with his question. I'll quit ranting at you and shouting at you myself. John, what do you got?
Tom, I'm sorry. My phone died. So I'm glad. Thank you for having me back. Jason, I might have missed some things because my phone was charging. So if I repeat something that Tom might have said, I apologize. But here in Niagara Falls, I noticed, it just happened the other day. There was a piece of property. It's on Memorial Parkway, whatever. It's a big warehouse. I think it's not even sure who owns it. Might be an NFR thing, Niagara Falls redevelopment. But they get reassessed a lot, like the Turtle did. This one does too. It was assessed at $360,000. It got dropped down to $100,000, and now they're owed $85,000 in being overtaxed. how, I guess I'm asking, how does that happen? How does that even happen? I mean, or how's it even allowed to happen?
Yeah, land value taxation is a really weird industry, and we tend to, um, commercial property is based on its sort of use value, right? Which is different than our homes, right? Our homes are based on the real property's market value. So when you get your tax bill, you look at the assessed value, and it's in theory supposed to be the value of your property on the market. Commercial property is different than that. It's valued differently and assessed differently. So when a building goes vacant, the property owner immediately, because it's commercial or industrial, manufacturing, whatever, the property owner immediately goes to local government and asks for reassessment downward because it's not functioning in the way that it was functioning before. I don't know what their arguments is. Maybe we're not putting as many trucks on the road, we're not using as much water and public services and those types of things, but generally that happens, and it happens all the time. So Niagara Falls, the Boulevard Mall is one of them, where we've seen a massive decrease in their assessed value. And so, commercial properties that have, no tenants or no use generally get a tax break. And if you think about, if you do that for you own a double and you've got a second unit upstairs that you can't rent out because of market challenges, the same market challenges that might be impacting a commercial property owner, going to local government and telling them that you can't make money on your house will not generally result in a reduction in the assessed value of that house. Right? So we treat commercial property in people's homes substantially different, right? Just think about, and I've always argued it's rather unfair, and particularly, spending a lot of time in vacancy and abandonment, tax foreclosure, these sort of areas. I've always argued that there's no incentive for a homeowner to invest in their property. But if you go on the commercial side of the ledger, there's massive incentive, because any capital improvements in a commercial property immediately can be written off. And so essentially, and then there's depreciation. So annually you depreciate the value of the asset till the point it has no value anymore, in theory, right? So that's why you see all these big boxes bounce around all the time. They've depreciated the value of their property, and then they want to move. There's no more extraction that they can get out of the tax code to get more value out of that property. So they either have to do a massive investment in an existing building and then write that off, or they build a brand new building and begin to redepreciating a brand new building. So the ledger's always tipped against the individual in the homeowner, and it's always tilted in favor of corporations and corporate.
Why? Like, is that set in stone at the state level? I mean, why do we do that?
I think it just has to do with the way that the assessment law is. It's just assessment law, right? And that, like I've always said, if you don't like the way the system functions, then we need to change the system. But then it becomes a very complicated challenge, and it becomes a challenge where the voices of the voiceless, right, the average person, collectively don't have the voice and the access, the power and the money to get into the halls of Albany and change things, right? So our hope is at the ballot box, you vote in the right people and they do the right thing, but it gets ground up in that system.
Does Brian from Amherst do this routinely? Like, I mean, an $85,000 refund check to a corporation, they couldn't cut the grass. The city can't cut the grass. They don't have any money. I'm
not sure if the supervisor is doing that type of sort of give back. That seems a little odd to me, but I don't know that you can. I don't know that argument works. That you can go, so I was overcharged 2 years ago on the assessed value of the property, and I want my money back. That just seems a little dubious to me. But I could be wrong.
Well, the numbers are a ballpark. It was like 400,000 reduced to 100,000 and challenged since 2012. So the refund was over 9 years, and it was $85,000. So they gave them a 400 to 100 reduction, and then a refund check of 85,000.
I mean, if he filed his taxes in 2012 or 13 under protest that the value of the assessed value was too high, maybe legally that, doing that in protest with an attorney might have started the ball rolling, where you were going to say you were going to protest the value moving forward until you got a resolution. That could be the case.
Hey, John, I'm piggybacking on your questions here. Do you have anything else? Was that it?
Right. No, the one last thing is I don't know if this is unique to the Falls or what, but that one development corporation company, whatever, they have Nabisco, which is huge, and same thing there. The Turtle, same thing there. This warehouse, same thing there. And the only thing about it that I think bothers me is, for example, the Nabisco building, they never did anything with it. When they got it, it's just like it was when, you know what I mean? Like they didn't, it isn't as though like the malls, I understand, you know, they were in business and things were happening. And then obviously just the world changes and people don't go to malls anymore. But when you have that Nabisco building, it's huge, a huge factory. They buy it, do nothing. Like they did nothing, never tried to do anything, and they get reassessed and or whatever. It's not, I don't even know what the hell's going on over there now. But is that unique to here? Like development, like NFR taking stuff just to let it sit?
So is that NFR? So there's, just looking at my property records here, NFR is Niagara Falls Redevelopment. And then it looks like they have a number of different corporations. So they have an NFR Gateway LLC, which looks like the Nabisco building. Then there's some vacant land behind it that's just Niagara Falls Redevelopment. Is that this entity out of New York City?
Yes.
Yep.
So there's a whole host of, you know, what I, you know, and other researchers sort of refer to as distressed property investors. Buy really, really low, sink your money into something that you think might have value down the road. Fight the assessed value until it's super, super low. So your carry costs annually are relatively inexpensive. My understanding is you can write off that loss annually, right? So there has to be, and I don't work on this side of the sort of commercial side of vacancy and abandonment very much, but there has to be something in the tax code that allows them to sit on property forever and not actually lose money. And my guess would be between depreciation and revenue and expenditures, which is, you know, net profit or net loss. These things manage, these people manage to turn what is a vacant and abandoned property into something that is revenue neutral for them. And then they just sit on it, right? And sit on it and sit on it and sit on it. That's another property the city could just go in and take it, right? The city could say, we're filing an eminent domain case against these properties. The developer's done nothing to them. They're at a gateway in our community. They have economic value that can support the functioning and service delivery of Niagara Falls local government. So we're taking it and we're going to come up with a plan to reuse it and redevelop it. And it literally just comes down to will.
Wow. Wow.
And New York State is one of the few states that did not, upon the passage, the Kelo versus New London case, New York State was one of the few states actually in the country that did not pass a state law that made that illegal, which was taking from one private person and giving to another private person for private development. We still allow that in New York State.
Wow. Well, we've got another question from Mark Shearer, who I think you know.
Yep.
Mark, you got your microphone on? There you go. Go ahead, Mark.
Hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Jason, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very well. I know that you wised up and got out of the journalism business, so I'd like to hear about that a little bit. But also, I was curious, you know, what is it, one or two things maybe that you think, you know, regular, everyday people who don't follow things as closely as maybe we do should know about land use, government, that kind of stuff? There's a couple things, you know, pieces of advice when you tell people, listen, if we want to improve a community, these are the things we need to look at.
Well, I would say that the big thing I think most people don't understand is local government is highly leveraged control over what happens in the community as it relates to land use. You know, and we are a home rule state, which means the state government delegates the powers of land use and zoning to local governments to do as they see fit. So when you think about that, they can redesign your zoning code to come up with something that is more appropriate in this economy. I have no idea when Niagara Falls last changed its zoning code. So that's, you know, that's one thing that ultimately there's a high level of power local government has. So find and elect officials that get that, right? That are at least knowledgeable of that reality. Eminent domain is a tool that can be used whether we love it or we don't. And the idea that we have to accept that the only way out of all of our problems in local government is to give property to, you know, to developers who then turn around after you've given them public property for pennies on the dollar, want to pay taxes at a pennies on the dollar rate, right? That system does not work, right? It does not put money. It basically says we're taking public land, we're giving it to private development. and then private development's going to turn around and pay taxes. Well, they never do. They turn around and they pay a pilot program, and they pay a percentage of those taxes, or they do whatever. I'll give you a classic example without going way down the road. The Catholic Health Building in downtown Buffalo at the end of the 33 was a project that was, the parcel was owned, I believe, by one of the big developers. I want to say ULAM, but I'm not entirely sure. They applied for tax incentives from ECIDA to the tune of something around $8 million, $6 million to build a facility for Catholic Health. In the pro forma that they admitted to or applied to ECIDA for these tax credits, they said right in there, upon sale of this property, upon completion of this development, we are going to turn this building over. It's going to be worth $40 or $44 million to Catholic Health. It will generate zero taxes because it's being turned over to a nonprofit, right? So when you, and then of course it's, you know, it's healthcare, right? It's the most expensive thing we buy, right? So we have this system where we're told by politicians that this type of development, like, oh, it's $44 million in new building downtown Buffalo. Well, what value is it to people if it's not paying any property taxes? Where's the inherent value in economic development when we do that? And the answer is it doesn't really exist. And in reality, in that case, you know, this is the wonky, nerdy part. But in the other case, the sort of the tag along with that is they closed a bunch of buildings around the region, offices, and moved everybody from those sort of satellite offices to downtown. Well, guess what? They created vacancy everywhere else. And guess what happened when they created vacancy? As Tom said, those property owners, I'm almost guarantee you went to local government and said, I have a vacancy now, I need a reduction in taxes. So the total net tax revenue generation just for Erie County alone probably went down on it because of that project, not up, right? So the system, most people don't want to dig into it. The system is completely not working, right?
Stunning. Mark, did you have a follow-up at all, or?
Well, I mentioned the media part of it, and I'm part of the media. And I think generally, and I think Jason would agree with this, there's not enough really, the type of things that Jason's talking about aren't really explored in depth. They're not really investigated. They're not really looked at in a sort of different way. There's sort of a lot of, and again, I know Jason has seen the other side where he was a reporter. So I guess I would ask you about that. I mean, is it our fault, I guess? You know, is it the media's fault? Are we not doing a good enough job?
Yeah, well, this bothers me all the time. I turn on the news and I see a local hamburger. Oh, it's got lettuce and tomato. That's what the newscaster's telling me. I want to see what you just told me. How come I have to resort to giving up a Sunday morning and asking you to give up a Sunday morning, Jason? I don't see it anywhere else. 247 of the Buffalo News. It obviously riles the hell out of me.
Yeah, I get slammed for my media criticism on Twitter occasionally because it's funny that there's a lot of ex-media people in Buffalo that defend the reporter. Well, it's okay to slam the media, right? And they like to be able to conveniently say, well, we shouldn't be critical of the reporter. We should be critical of the entity, of the agency. But the reality is the reporter, like I've always said, like if you work for some industry or entity that you don't agree with the work that they do, then quit. Otherwise, you're part of the problem, undeniably. So, you know, writing stories, the Buffalo News loves all that stuff, right? So it's front page bars and restaurants and gentrification, you know, what I call recreational conspicuous consumption, right? It's the USA Today's happy news, lots of graphics, not a lot of substance, right? And we've done that. And so, you know, Investigative Post, I think, does great work. But the Buffalo News does nothing, right? 2, 4, and 7 do very little, right? So, you know, today's Sunday. So if you open the Buffalo News, what's on the front page of the Buffalo News? I guarantee it. Real estate transactions, right? Let's celebrate a housing market that is making people housing poor and making people unable to pay their rents. Let's celebrate that, right? So it's a real sort of bizarre media environment that we're in the one newspaper town that's clearly and undeniably controlled by the political machine, right? And so they're gonna do what the mayor says and what elected officials say because they're in cahoots with all those people. It's just a really incestuous relationship between what I sort of configure as the big three: developers and businesses, politicians, and the media, right? And they control what gets done and what gets said about what gets done, and that's a problem.
Can we fix that in any way? Because what I say, if that gave me Shangri-La, if that gave me Singapore, Jason, I'd be all for it. Like, go ahead and keep doing it, more of the same. but we actually have the proof of what it gives us, which is really, really bad neighborhoods and destitution and horrible employment picture. So how do we change that? India Walton, of course, rocked everybody's world, but how do we do it? Tell me.
Yeah, I'm always 50-50, like Jekyll and Hyde on a lot of this stuff, because ultimately it's hard to blame politicians. It's hard to blame Byron Brown when people keep putting that guy in office, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and I think India's campaign is a classic example. At the end of the day, people just got sick of it, right? You're never afforded a challenger. No one steps forward. The system beats down any challenger. And so what you have now is a really highly visible campaign that championed people's causes. And that woke up a lot of people. So I just think a better educated voter, and I'm not saying educated like in a wonky know every detail about everything, but really someone who doesn't just take what the news tells them as gospel, and maybe listens to other people and has conversations outside their echo chamber and really comes to understand what it means to be involved in local government, to be a voter for local government, to understand where your tax dollars go and where they don't go. I think would result in better outcomes. We also need one, and maybe India is the one if she wins. We need one person to show that we can still do the things that we have done, which is, I don't think India's point is to stop economic development. I know that people say, well, her goal is socialism and she's going to turn the faucet off. She knows that you can't do that. You can't just stop growth and development. That doesn't work. But what you can do is do things a little bit more equitable and a little bit more just and a little bit more comprehensive, so that it gets out beyond the gentrified neighborhoods and you get into the places that need the most investment and the most care. So I think, you find somebody who shows that there's a different pathway forward and they deliver on it. Then you have candidates that come out of the woodwork and start going, okay, we can do this way. But until then, the political machine in this state continues to run on jobs, economic growth. And when you look at the data, it doesn't really bear out any success.
You mentioned USA Today, and that it's almost like a flashback to that time. USA Today was an investigative paper compared to what we have out there right now. They had more stories. How much of a joke is that? Do you think again, India Walton proved it. Do you think there's a market for that? Investigative Post is the gold standard right now, but it's a little bit like the Atlantic and the New Yorker, 10,000 word articles that, aren't getting any oxygen.
Yeah.
How do we reach people and say, of Catholic health is not a benefit to you. You aren't getting a street paved specifically because the Turtle got their taxes reduced. You are paying a garbage fee in Niagara Falls specifically because that warehouse isn't rented. How do we get to that message?
Yeah, it's sort of my arrogance about sort of the educated voter, right? It's hard to capture the attention of the Twitter, Facebook people who are just looking for things in 30-second bites, right? You need a committed person to dig into it or read a piece that digs into it, and then you need that sort of sent through the echo chamber so that people understand what's really happening. Investigative Post does a lot of that work, but Investigative Post is like every other news organization, right? We turn to it because we want to hear the things that they're doing, and there's a lot of people out there that just don't give a shit about this kind of work, right? So they're like, bury their head in their sand. I'm going to go out for a $7 beer tonight and life is hunky dory, right? And so those people are just, they don't care. Life is good for them. And so I don't know the media answer, right? The Investigative Post is about all we got. And if I went on Twitter right now and said that, I get slammed by every ex-media member in the city whose friends still work in the media and fun all over development and all the other stuff. But it's the reality. The Buffalo News is undeniably, in my mind, worthless and part of the problem.
What do you do with somebody that blasts you after you say something like that, and all they're doing is writing about developers in a positive way? They have no credibility to blast you.
Yeah, I don't feed the trolls on Twitter. I don't respond. I don't debate on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so, I'm pretty calculated on the things I say on Twitter because I know them to be generally true. And so if somebody wants to come back at me and say, well, not everybody's bad, and I'm like, well, they work for the evil empire. So I just don't get into that debate. I don't devolve into that because I don't find any value in it. And so I just ignore it. I don't read the Buffalo News. I don't have cable, so I don't watch 247. Like, I get Buffalo News headlines and I get it through my Twitter feed, and that's how I engage with it, but I don't read it.
Yeah. Hey, one last question because we're running out of time, but So I posit Niagara Falls is unique and worth the block of marble to hit on. Are we in New York or Western New York any worse than any other part of the country? I mean, they built Branson, Missouri out of nothing. They built Las Vegas in the desert. Is there something cursed here? Did something happen where we're just actually cursed and we can't get out of our way? Or do we have hope? I mean, I don't know. Is apathy everywhere?
Well, I mean, if you're following me on Twitter, you probably know that I'm pretty cynical and pessimistic about the state of the state, right? I mean, the reality for me and the way I sort of envision it is the state is really old. It's an original 13 colony, right? We developed a state constitution and a set of guidelines that are hundreds of years old, right? Just like the Constitution developed in a time where we didn't even have motorized vehicles, right? And so and then on top of that, rather than fix the existing structural problems, we add solutions, right? So we created this entire farm industry, this entire industry of nonprofit public authorities, right? So New York Power Authority, these untouchable entities that charge us for rates for public utilities that can take on as much debt as they want without any oversight. There's no transparency. We have duplication of services. We have home rule. We have way too many governments in Erie County, 44 governments in the county. I will stand and fight on this hill forever. We have too much government in New York State, way too much. And I'm not an anti-government nut job. That's not my thing. My thing is, I live in a city, Tonawanda, right? This city doesn't need to exist as currently organized. It doesn't. The line on the map is purely arbitrary. It has zero meaning to service delivery other than to bound it within this 2-mile radius, this 2-mile area.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to exist. We don't need our own school district. We're surrounded on 3 sides by the town of Tonawanda. We have our own police force, our own paid fire department, and our own school district. Because by state law, we have to have those things, just like Niagara Falls. I would be willing to bet if you did the research that our cities, the 62 cities in New York State, are in way worse fiscal condition than anybody else because of the requirements under state law to have those things. Your own school district, your own paid police department, and your own paid fire. Whereas the suburban communities get that sort of socialized, right? So they get sheriff patrol, or they get volunteer fire, or they get trooper coverage, or they get the county roads, county sewers, county water. Cities are beholden to have all that stuff on their own. So we had this really old baked in system of these silos of local government that don't interact, that are told they have to compete and jab their neighbor in the neck for households and jobs. So we create this really bizarre game of musical chairs where everyone is fighting each other and there's no collective action. We're the only region in upstate New York that doesn't have a regional planning board, because we still function under the model that Niagara Falls is going to live and die by competing with everybody else, and there's no collective action. And so our state is absolutely backwards when you think about the way government should be run. And I'm not saying Florida's great or Texas is great or Arizona's great, but when you go down there, Phoenix went from a tiny little dot of 8,000 people in 1900 to one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, and it basically annexes land. It was a few square miles, and now it's over 500 square miles. Well, what's Buffalo going to do? No, it can't do anything. It can't annex, and its land is constrained to the 44 square miles of downtown, right? So what we get from an outcome perspective in terms of high taxation, inefficiency, waste, all that stuff is really, in my mind, embedded in the structural system of local government and service delivery. It's backwards. It's so old and antiquated, it should just go away. And so I don't know. I'm not as optimistic about New York State as maybe others are. But if you're backing it up to sort of end on the conversation of how does Niagara Falls, this is where we are. Niagara Falls has to compete and serve its own interests. And it has to compete with Buffalo and Grand Island and Tonawanda and, Newport and all these other places. It has to fight, and its actually incentive is to actually steal from their neighbors.
Yeah.
Now, how does that system work for an economy that is regional in nature, where those lines on the map are irrelevant to the regional economy? We're one regional economy. But within that regional economy, we have 64 fiefdoms that fight over jobs and people. It's insane. It's the most insane. If you said 200 years ago, this is how this is going to work, people would be like, this is the worst idea ever. Yeah. But we're still doing it.
Yeah. Jason, thank you so much for giving up an hour. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, hopefully we'll talk again soon. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. See you, Mark.
Bye-bye.